See?
That I knew it was going to be a race to second because everybody believed.
Yeah, there was no issue there, which is nice.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. And then I can go into presentation mode.
Very
Perfect.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're just getting the handouts printed for you. So, but we can go ahead and we'll get you the printouts when they're ready. Couple of
Sure.
seconds.
We can look here for now. It's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see, we got you. Okay, very good. Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This evening, I'm going to be introducing Andy Burnham and David Hyder from the consulting firm Stantec. And they're going to be reviewing with the Man Council their and staff's recommendations for water and sewer rates to be set for fiscal years 2019, 2020, and 2021. We're going to learn about some of the key cost drivers and challenges that impact our water and sewer systems, and you'll be receiving recommendations for how to achieve the Man Council goals to bring the systems to have positive reserve balances by the year originally established as a 2021 goal, and where we can't achieve that, where the revised plan is, what the revised plan is. In addition to reviewing the rates, they will be briefing you on a separate analysis done as requested on the city's multi-family rate structure, and making recommendation to the cities on the city's capital contribution fees for the water and sewer rate systems. And now I'm going to turn it over to Andy Burnham. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Andy Burnham with Stantec. With me today is Dave Hyder. My voice has returned, so thankfully I'll be able to lead us through the conversation today. And of course, obviously we look forward to having an engaging conversation relative to the presentation and any other questions that you may have as it pertains to our study. So just a brief bit of introduction and background first relative to Stantec and some prior exercises that we've done. And then I wanted to jump into and kind of segment the conversation into an update to the financial management plans for your water and sewer systems, and then talk about the multifamily analysis as well as the capital contribution updates that we've done. So Stantec, Dave and I are part of the financial services practice at Stantec. So while it's a 22,000 person firm focused predominantly in planning, engineering, design, and architecture, it does also have a specialty financial management consulting practice that Dave and I are a part of that is largely comprised of folks from Burton and Associates, which we had the opportunity to conduct the 2014 rate study for the city. And so it is a national practice supporting over 250 communities across the country with 1,500 studies. So we are able to bring a significant number of best practices as well as industry-leading contributions that we've offered for a variety of communities and in different situations and contexts across the country. And so some of you may have seen through our process, we've introduced some innovative modeling tools and best practices for the management of the utilities that have been maintained over the past couple of years for the city, and also have tried to extract from that some good data visualization and communication level items. So we'll be going through those this evening. So by way of background, many of you may remember the comprehensive rate study that was conducted in fiscal year 2014. It led to the implementation of a new rate structure that was implemented on July 1st of 2015. So that would be fiscal year ending 16. In that study, it identified large fund balances or negative fund balances, if you will, or implicit borrowings to the general fund. And we'd work together to develop multi-year financial management plans that would respectively achieve a positive fund balance in both the water and sewer enterprise funds, respectively, by fiscal year 2021. And as part of that plan, the first step was to adopt a 3-year rate plan inclusive of a new rate structure that would capture the first 3 years of that 6-year plan, fiscal years 16, 17, and 18. And so as part of the process as well, there was a discussion relative to the continued monitoring of the financial performance of the utilities to make sure that we stayed on track with these plans to achieve financial sustainability within each of the enterprise funds, and to account for updated information as it became available about changes in economic conditions, cost requirements of the utilities, a number of other variables that may change over time from projections from an initial study. And so those updates have been performed annually since the conduct of the initial study, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those results today as part of the process. So this particular study, as I mentioned, really first and foremost was intended to develop updated multi-year financial plans for the water and sewer enterprise funds to make sure that we had sufficient revenues to meet the operating and capital needs of the system, to make sure that we could stay in compliance and repay our outstanding and any new indebtedness, and to make sure that we could ultimately have adequate reserves for the utilities as part of those multi-year plans. We also then looked at separately the multifamily rate structure analysis. This was an item identified initially as part of the 2014 study for future consideration. So we've done some analysis on that through a detailed review of the multifamily accounts and wanted to set that up for a conversation today. And we've also updated the unit cost of the capital contribution charges. This will be the first update of those charges since they were last reviewed as part of the 2014 rate study. And so I want to spend just a couple of slides talking about those updated charges as well. So some notable changes since the 2014 rate study. The first have been changes in the wastewater costs associated with the Blue Plains facility, both in terms of capital expenditure requirements as well as operating expenses. So from fiscal year 2015 to 2018, the actual capital expenditure requirements for that facility have been about $3 million higher than what were included in the initial rate study. And then the operating expenses, in round numbers, those were about $2 million more, largely associated with some true-up provisions that I think you're all very aware of that particularly hit in fiscal year 2016. So all told, the wastewater system had $5 million of increases in cost requirements that were really outside of its control associated with those treatment and disposal requirements of the city's treated wastewater effluent. On the positive side, since last year's update, there have been some changes to the administrative charge allocations to the enterprise funds that have reduced those expenditure requirements that have offset some of those increases to a certain extent. And on the water side in particular, we have seen some declines in metered volumes. And we saw this trend as part of the initial study. And so if you think back to the timing of when the fiscal year 2014 rate study was conducted, it was made and done based upon all of this billing information through fiscal year 2013. Fiscal year 2014 and 2015 occurred after the conduct of the study, and the new rates weren't implemented until fiscal year 2016. And while it may be hard to note, the third, on the right-hand side, that third bar in, you can see a significant drop in demands from fiscal year 14 to 15, a year before the new rate structure was implemented, but after the conduct of the initial study. So that impacted the revenue generation that the new rates were expected to provide because of that decline in demands that was certainly not forecasted, and demands have not rebounded since that 2015 decline. So it's created a little bit of unanticipated revenue pressure associated with that type of a change. So in terms of where we stand today, we've updated the financial forecasting models for each of the utility systems for water and wastewater. And so we have a screen capture for the water financial model that compares in blue the current results versus in green the results of last year's update. And Dave has some animation or some call-outs that will help draw our attention to some key parameters of the financial plan. The first call-out that's popped up with the orange background on it is relative to the achievement of our 6-month reserve target by fiscal year 2021 for the water system. And so you can see that with that as our key component of our financial plan, we've then identified a corresponding rate adjustment plan that would be necessary to provide adequate revenues to achieve that reserve target by fiscal year 2021, and then allow us to maintain that reserve target into the future in a sustainable way, where our revenues and expenses, that top right graph, are in alignment each year. And once we've built those reserves to that 6-month target, the portion of our revenues that we're going to establish that positive reserve condition and achieve that 6-month target would now be able to allow us to have a better distribution and sustainable capital funding strategy that's less reliant on debt and more reliant on our current annual revenues to pay and support needed reinvestment in our infrastructure on an annual basis. And what that leads to is, after that plan, a return to inflationary increases very consistent with what was identified in the 2014 study, less than 2% per year once we've addressed that fundamental reserve condition. And so in terms of the makeup of what's really driving the changes in rates in the near term, you can see that operating expenses represent about 40% of our rate increase drivers, and renewal and replacement is, in round numbers, approximately 30%. And we've got about 22% associated with continuing to move forward and address our negative fund balance condition. And that, again, once we've addressed that red piece of the pie will expand, and we'll now be able to direct more of our annual revenues to renewal and replacement once we've met our desired reserve targets for the enterprise fund beginning in fiscal year 2021. On the wastewater side, a similar comparison of where we are this year in blue versus where we were in last year's update in green. And again, in this particular case, the notable change we made was actually extending the time period to achieve the 6 month reserve target from 2021 to 2023 in an effort to reduce the level of near-term rate adjustments for the sewer system. The past 3 years, we've had a little over 12% increases on wastewater rates over the past 3 years. And so if we're able to extend that reserve target policy achievement from 2021 to 2023, we can moderate the level of near-term rate adjustments. So for the initial 3 years, they would be at about 6.8% per year, followed by 8.8% increases for the subsequent 2 years, which is during a time period when the water increases have stabilized down to about 1% per year. And that will allow us to, on the wastewater side, have a sustainable plan where revenues are matching expenditures. And once we've again hit that reserve target, we'll be able to take that revenue stream that was going to build the reserves and direct it to our capital improvement program so we can have a much more sustainable revenue source for our capital improvements for the utility. And once we've done that, again, after that time period within which we've hit that reserve requirement, we're then just maintaining the status quo and have very low level of inflationary increases from that point going forward to sustain the financial integrity of the system. And so for this system, there's a little bit more pie pieces, particularly because of the operating and capital costs associated with Blue Plains. And so you can see those are the orange and red pie pieces respectively. And then we have our other operating costs, renewal and replacement in blue. And then obviously the addressing of the fund balance situation for wastewater is a bigger portion of our near-term requirements that eventually over time, once that's addressed, will shift to be more representative of, I think, the orange pie pieces and the blue pie pieces, shifting more dollars of investment to Blue Plains and our own system renewal and replacement once we've addressed that condition by 2023. So when you put these two things together, those were the identified levels of overall revenue recovery for each respective utility, about 5% approximately per year for water and about 6.8% per year for sewer for the next 3 years. However, as part of the 2014 study, we did highlight that at the time, we were only generating about 5% of our revenues from the readiness to serve charges, the fixed charges on the utility bill, when roughly about 80 to 90% of our expenses are fixed. And agencies like Fitch and other municipal credit rating agencies are looking for utilities to have greater levels of fixed cost recovery and fixed charges, more like 20 to 30% of revenues. And so we've developed a plan to continue that progression. We're currently capturing about 9% of our revenues and our readiness to serve charges or fixed monthly charges. By the end of this time period, with a slight differential in those adjustments, we can get to about 12% by the end of the forecast period. And so we're again continuing to move gradually on that trend, being mindful of affordability impacts to low volume users whose readiness to serve charge will represent a bigger portion of their bill, but also trying to balance our own financial stability and fixed cost recovery objectives. We think this plan continues to do that in a responsible way. The dotted lines on the table just indicate by 2021 is when we would hit the 6-month target of reserves for the water fund. And then 2023 is again when we would hit the 6-month target based upon these identified rate adjustments for the wastewater fund. And then from that point forward, you can see both systems would be looking at less than approximately 2% per year from that point forward to sustain the systems. So in terms of what that means, we've taken a typical customer with a 3/4 inch meter and 15,000 gallons per quarter and aggregated what do those specific rates and charges mean to their utility bill, and identified that from fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 2021, we're talking about a 6.4% roughly increase, 6.3 to 6.4, and that continues at about that 6% level for a couple of years, and then it's going to drop to less than 2% per year once we've addressed the wastewater needs in 2022 and 2023. So we do have what we think is a more modest plan of increases than what was otherwise contemplated in the 2014 study, which have required 12% rate adjustments or more for the wastewater system over the next 3 years to hit that 6-month fund balance target by 2021. And so to add some perspective to the conversation, first nationally, the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their Consumer Price Index that many of us are familiar with and associate as a measure of inflation, it's made up of about 190 different goods and services, one of which is specifically the cost of water and sewer service to households. And they conduct their industry research with the same level of usage each year. So it's really an indirect measure of the national average change in water and sewer rates across the country. And so that red line shows the annual change. So it's generally ranged from about 4 to 7% per year as the national average increase in utility rates over the past 10 years. If you take this back 20, 30, or even 40 years, the annual average has been over 5% per year for water and sewer systems. And that blue dotted line just represents the cumulative increase of those adjustments over the past 10 years. So again, what we're talking about is initially slightly higher than the national average, but long term we're going to be looking at a plan of adjustments for the utility system based upon what we know today that is much less than what the industry as a whole is experiencing. We also did some local bill comparisons, taking for a 5/8" meter, which represents, and this is with some of the statistics we had from the last study, about 40% of the customer base. You can see combined what our current cost of water and sewer services today vis-a-vis many neighboring communities and some communities that we'd also looked at as part of the 2014 study for a benchmarking analysis that are shaded in a different color of purple. And we've also prepared these bill comparisons for a 3/4" meter based upon 5,000 gallons of water use per month to show you how you would compare at that usage level. This represents somewhere between 40 to 45% of your utility customer accounts. The 1-inch customer class, which is the next slide that Dave was going to, that represents somewhere between about 10 to 15% of your utility accounts. And you can again see how you compare versus the other agencies relative to the cost of water and sewer service. And many of these agencies, it is noted, are actively pursuing rate studies, such as Vienna, Loudoun Water. Who else, Dave, are pursuing studies at this point?
Vienna, Herndon. So a lot of these communities are examining rates.
And it might be worth also just sharing your knowledge and experience with WSSC and some research you've gathered from them as well.
Yeah, based on my discussions with WSSC, their plan is that basically it's going to look like about a 5 or 6% increase annually going forward is what it, based on my discussions with them. So ongoing increases of about 5 or 6%.
Which is consistent with the industry trend. So we'll be keeping at a similar level of increase with this plan for the next few years. But once we've addressed the reserve requirements of the utilities, we're going to be going up at a much lesser rate than what these other utility systems will. So all these surveys are a snapshot in time based upon where we stand today, and it's an important point to be aware of and understand. But it is going to change from year over year as each community addresses the needs of their community and their infrastructure based upon its various levels of condition and what they've determined their needs are. So we also had a little bit to talk about relative to the multifamily rate analysis that we've done. So one of the things that is an important starting foundational point is you really have a singular uniform rate structure that's applicable to all customer types. So you have rates and tiers that are scheduled by meter size, both in terms of your readiness to serve charges, as well as how much usage is allowed in each tier of your inclining block rate structure. And that same structure and system is applicable to residential, single-family residential customers, commercial, multifamily, even separate water-only irrigation meters. So when you look at multifamily and specifically carve them out, one of the things that utilities will commonly look at for multifamily, if you were to have a separate rate class for them, is to base their readiness to serve charges and their usage allowances on the number of dwelling units that each individual account has, as that's a better reflection of the potential and actual demands of each multifamily property, because they'll all have various meter sizes, different metering configurations for landscape meters, and different numbers of dwelling units. And so we looked at two alternative rate structures for multifamily that would apply the dwelling units for calculating readiness to serve charges and usage rates. In the first structure, it would be at 100% of what it is today for a typical single-family home. So they would pay a full 5/8 by 3/4 inch readiness to serve charge per dwelling unit, and we would scale the amount of usage in each tier based upon the number of dwelling units an account would have. So if it's a 5-unit multifamily complex, they would get 5 times 15,000 gallons or 75,000 gallons in their first tier in this type of a structure. The alternative B that we looked at was to say, well, what if we looked at the average usage per unit for multifamily versus single-family homes and scaled both the readiness to serve charges and usage within each tier based upon that ratio of observed use of a multifamily dwelling unit to our single-family homes, and that's at about 50%. And so what that means in terms of dollar impacts to the utilities, we've captured on this slide. So if you look at the first table, it's for the water system. It identifies the change in the readiness to serve charge revenue. It identifies what we're currently collecting in annual revenues and what we would collect on our alternative A with 100% of our readiness to serve charge applied to the dwelling units, or under option B or alternative B, how much revenue we would collect based upon application of 50% of that charge to each dwelling unit. And so as you would expect, we would achieve a significant increase in revenue for both water, and if you look at the same line on sewer, in terms of our readiness to serve charge revenue. But if we're going to go down that type of a path with a rate structure, we should also consider adjusting the usage allowances to reflect the same level of usage per dwelling unit for multifamily as we would for a single family home. If you recall back to the 2014 rate structure, the basis of our first tier was indoor water use for a typical household size, 2.5 people. The second tier was based on indoor water use for a larger family of 4 or 5. You could have instances where you would have those types of populations within a multifamily unit or a single family home. So they should, in theory, have similar levels of usage allowances per unit, particularly for those first 2 tiers. So if you expanded the tiers, you would actually have reductions in the revenue you would collect on water. On the sewer side, since you bill at a uniform rate, there's no impact to the usage charge revenues, as you can see on the bottom chart. So in conclusion, the water system would experience some revenue shortfalls, the sewer system would experience some revenue increases, but what this really uncovered was a bit of a bigger picture conversation of, do we need to consider at some point in the future performing a cost of service analysis so that we can understand what our true costs are to serve a residential customer class, commercial, multifamily, and separate irrigation only meters, and then look at having separate rate structures for each class. As opposed to simply carving out multifamily and not understanding the full cost to serve the multifamily class as part of this conversation. So from our perspective, we think it might make sense to recommend to you consideration of a cost of service study at some point in the future that would provide a firm foundation upon which you could evaluate alternative rate structures, not just for multifamily, but for other customer classes that would be different than what you have in place today. And lastly, on the capital contribution charges, we've also updated the unit cost of your capacity for your existing system. These are the fees that are one-time upfront charges assessed to either new development or redevelopment for additional capacity needs over and above the original development to cover their fair share of the cost of capacity of the system. The calculation method that we've used has been the replacement cost of the system less depreciation and your current capacity, because your existing system has the infrastructure and capacity built within it that's going to accommodate your growth in the near term. And so when we update those fee calculations, you can see that the water fee is $4,100, the wastewater fee is $7,600. Based upon the current unit cost information from your fixed asset registry, and the capacities, we're at $3,800 for water and $8,100 for sewer, $11,900. So we're very comparable in cost, both between the individual fees as well as in total to where you stand today. So it's our recommendation that you don't necessarily make any adjustments to these charges today, but again, continue to monitor how your costs are trending over time and perform an update in accordance with industry practice, say every 3 to 5 years, to make sure you're fully capturing your unit cost of capacity from growth and redevelopment. And so we did also provide a survey or perform a survey of the same entities of their capital charges. This is for a new 1-inch meter, so you can see comparatively the cost of a water and sewer capital contribution charge in Rockville versus the same communities for a new 1-inch meter connection. So you can see you're very comparable on your upfront capital cost for new development or redevelopment. And so kind of packaging everything together, what we've worked together with staff is to develop a new 3-year schedule of rate adjustments for the water and sewer utility systems that will keep water on the path to achieve a 6-month fund balance target by 2021. But for sewer reflects an extension of 2 years in consideration of affordability and rate impacts to customers to 2023 to achieve that 6-month operating target. And that again, we do recommend that you continue to monitor this annually, and to the extent there are significant changes, make adjustments to the plan, both up or down. If positive things were to occur, potentially you could make reductions to the level of rate adjustments to still meet these same financial parameters. Either way, continued financial management and observation of these systems will be an important part of making sure that you're able to hit these targets that we're talking about today. We also do recommend at this point you keep the same rate structure that's in place today and don't necessarily create a new one for multifamily until or unless you consider a full cost of service study that would give you a solid foundation and understanding of your cost distribution between customer classes that could support a new rate structure for not only multifamily but potentially for other subclasses of customers that may also have appeal to the mayor and council. And we also do recommend maintaining the current capital contribution charges at the current level and performing an update in 3 to 5 years, or as conditions may change substantially enough to warrant performing an update. But generally 3 to 5 years is a pretty consistent industry practice for those. So I've said a lot, you've heard a lot. I'm happy to answer questions and have a dialogue with you. And of course, Dave's available as well to support that.
Great. Thank you both very much, and thank you for your time and meeting with us individually or in groups. That was very, very helpful.
Absolutely, our pleasure.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Councilmember Prashela.
Thank you. I wasn't on the council last time y'all came, but I got to say, the quality of your work is extraordinarily good, and the meeting that we had, I really enjoyed that. And I read through just about all the report. I didn't go over through every table, but certainly it was certainly understandable. I did read on page 64 the idea of a full cost of service study, and that really stood out to me. That I personally think we ought to go ahead and do that. And as far as the rest of it, as far as your recommendations, I'm fine with them for now. And I think, however, once we get the results, if we do a full cost of service study, once we get the results, maybe that's a good time to reconsider our rate structure. But certainly to get our reserves in line with where they should be, water and sewer are not cheap. One of the things we've learned over the years, there's always another mandate for improvements to our water treatment plant. There's always mandates for Blue Plains. Pipes are going bad, and we are in the city taking steps to replace our pipes, but that's just going to be a never-ending chore. I mean, that's not going to be done. So we're going to do it, and we're going to redo it over the years. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the comments.
Councilmember Feinberg.
Thank you very much. I too wanted to talk a little bit about the cost of services study, because I had read that here and also you highlighted it today. Are there any studies that we might look at or you could provide so we could get a fuller understanding that are in the public domain and are not proprietary that you could
Absolutely.
share with us?
Yeah, we'd be happy to. And there's also some frameworks that are identified through American Water Works Association
Right.
publications about the process that would describe what a cost of service study is. And so we can give not only some samples, but point you in the right direction relative to some more just general process and what it means to conduct the studies. as
Great.
well.
I think that would be very helpful for all of us and for staff as a kind of as a follow-up.
Sure.
So thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
I am glad to see that we are making progress on our enterprise funds. It's something that certainly staff had shared with us over the past several years, and the absolute need for us to get a control over this fund. So I thank the staff too for really honchoing this and in conjunction with you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
I have one question in regards to the capital charges. So, I mean, as you noted, the overall charge for water and sewer is about where it should be, just a $200 discrepancy, but water is getting a little more than it should be, and sewer is getting a little less. Is part of the reason that we shouldn't be too concerned about this is there's just so few hookups that are done each year, so it's kind of fiddling at the 0.01% in terms of this?
I mean, you could make adjustments. Water is slightly above, but we noticed this in 2014 as well. Actually, the gap was a little wider then. And what this is there's generally 3 accepted methodologies to calculate these types of fees. And given your system condition where you don't have a capital improvement program that's full of expansion-related projects, we look to your existing system costs. And what we noted a few years ago is that some of the assets that are in the system, it goes back to your comments, actually are fully depreciated. And so as you continue to reinvest in your system, your cost basis will slightly increase. We noticed that from last year to this year, but it wasn't a substantial change. So maybe at the next update, there would be enough of a difference that would maybe lead us to a conversation about potentially adjusting the fees. But at this point, it didn't necessarily make sense for us to reduce one and increase the other to end up at about the same place, given what we're seeing in the data and our comfort level with the numbers and assumptions in the analysis. You're welcome.
Councilmember Feinberg.
And I think I also had read that actually the usage is going down. So it's almost counterintuitive. It's like the speed cameras and the red light cameras, although I'm almost afraid to mention those words. Those are really for education, not for revenue. And so you don't achieve as much revenue necessarily when people are being educated and driving more safely. It's same thing with here, as more people may be renovating and putting in more cost-efficient toilets and just other water conservation practices in their homes and their daily living, they may be using more water, so it's kind of, it's a good thing environmentally, it's a bad thing for the revenue.
Yeah, well, and your point's a good one on capital charges, because at
Right.
some point we will have to look at and assess your level of service standards, and that today your capacity serves a certain number of equivalent residential units, but as that standard comes down, you actually have more capacity in the system, which would serve to lower that unit cost. So that's, again, these are a variety of factors of why you would update this every 3 to 5 years, but we didn't see anything in this particular update that caused us concern that would suggest we should make some changes at this point.
Right. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And I think you've heard from everybody, and we'll take step number 2, Mr. Cohen, and direct staff to prepare the water and sewer rate ordinance consistent with the rates as summarized in attachment B.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just one or two other housekeeping items, if that's okay. I just wanted to make sure in your action plan 2017-5, you had questions about the capital contribution charges relative to when a renovated house gets charged a fee. I know there's been an issue with that in the past. In June, we sent the Mayor and Council some information in that regard, and I've asked Rob and Robbie this evening, just in case you had any additional questions relative to that. So you'll see when you get to the action plan tonight was effectively the follow-up for that. So if you have any other questions this evening about the capital contribution fee, when it gets charged, Rob and Robbie are here for you. That's to try and get off the action plan because it's been out there for a while. So I just wanted to make sure we address that as well, if you have any questions.
So I do, but I'm not prepared to address that tonight, and I will take care of that in the future.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Second, the rate study, as you saw, as well as the presentation, is posted to the website separately under the budget work sessions. So you can get it through the agenda system and or directly through the budget website. Again, due to the importance of this topic, a reminder that we are holding a separate public hearing on the recommended rate changes that's going to be held on January the 8th, 2018. That's the first meeting back in the new year. And then, as the Mayor just said, the water and sewer rate ordinance itself will be introduced on February the 26th. And again, the members of the public can comment on this topic all the way through the final public hearing on the budget. We've got 2 more coming up on March the 19th and April the 9th. So the ordinance introduced in February, public hearings thereafter, public hearing in January, plenty of opportunities for the public to comment on the proposed rates. And that concludes the staff presentation, subject to any questions that you may have.
Anybody have any other questions? Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
Actually, I was going to say, Mr. Cohen, it's very timely that you said that the other staff are here. I actually revisited my email correspondence with them from this summer, and that was actually very helpful for me in realizing the distinction between if someone's adding, say, a bathroom, that they may need to increase the size of their distribution line, but not necessarily their meter size. And so I'm happy to, I'll forward that actually to my colleagues. I don't think the rest were on that email chain, but I wanted to thank you all for that.
Sure, thank you.
Councilmember Pershela?
Madam Mayor, maybe it's a topic for future budget work sessions, but I would like to pursue this idea of conducting a full cost of service study, when that should be done, what the cost of that should be approximately, and maybe we should put it in the upcoming budget to actually conduct that study.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Pershela, is it the preference to do it and fund it this year, or when we get closer to ending the current plan, which could push it out another year or so? Because then it would, the results of that could inform a different rate structure at the end of the current plan, which is set to, if we meet it by 2021.
Right, I understand what you're saying, but to talk about a fundamental revision of the rate structure itself rather than just the increase in fees from year to year is a wholly different topic.
Yes.
And I recall even before Mayor Newton and I first got on the council in 2009, I recall several meetings with previous mayor and councils about rate structures and how to make them equitable. And what I'm find intriguing about the full cost of service study is the way that it would break down classes of customers. And I appreciated, Madam Mayor asked a very good question about how we charge multifamily units. That's a great question to ask, and we got an answer. Not quite what I expected, but it was a useful answer because it told us what we needed to know. On the other hand, if we wanted to go further with that idea, then I think we need that study. Now, I'll just not answer the question about the timing, and maybe the city manager can come back to us further in the budget process about what the correct timing of that would be. But my experience is that rate structures about how you charge each class of customers, those are very difficult and long-winded conversations that can go over the space of a calendar year before you finally settle on something. So that's, wouldn't hurt, wouldn't bother me at all to have that study sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands.
Okay, thank
All right,
you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.